In this video, I will describe two popular video games and give them a rating based on how they perform when the rules of international humanitarian law are applied to them. Each game will be rated out of 10, with 10 being the highest score. International humanitarian law has 4 basic rules. There must be a distinction made between civilians and enemy combatants. POWs should not be subject to torture or execution and must be treated humanely and with dignity. The only legitimate target of war is to weaken an enemy's military capability. Certain categories of people and objects must receive additional protection. For this project, I will look at the action game Red Faction Guerrilla and the real-time strategy game Sins of a Solar Empire. Red Faction is a third-person shooter developed by Ludology. In the game, the player takes control of Alex Mason, a newly arrived Martian colonist eager to start a new life as a miner. Upon arriving, he quickly realizes that life on Mars is extremely harsh, due mainly to the cruelty and mistreatment of the miners by the Earth Defense Forces, or EDF. Before long, Alex joins a local resistance group called Red Faction, and so begins a fun and destructive struggle for freedom. The game is set on Mars' Tarsus region, and is an open world sandbox game giving the player a lot of freedom when it comes to completing missions and moving around. The sprawling colony is home to a large population of civilian NPCs and EDF soldiers. This being a game about a guerrilla war, much of the fighting takes place within the colony, with collateral damage a certainty and somewhat focus of the game. The game's Geomod 2 engine allows for the destruction of almost every man-made structure and vehicle within the game world. This can be done with a handy sledgehammer or an interesting array of explosives. Blowing up things is unsurprisingly a lot of fun, so the needs of the civilian population come second to the orgy of mines, remote charges, rockets and nanodisintegrators. Red Faction is a violent game where combat is intense and brutal. While it is not very gory, the body count is high, with my first playthrough resulting in me being personally responsible for the deaths of over 2,500 EDF soldiers, 300 civilians, and hundreds of vehicles, both civilian and military. The game penalises the player if civilians come to harm by affecting what is known as the morale meter. Letting civilians die through careless driving or weapons use lowers morale, while actively killing them reduces this much faster. If the player engages the EDF in an area with high morale, squads of armed civilians will come to your aid. This can help the player a lot as you are no longer the only target for the EDF, and some later missions are next to impossible if you attempt them without some form of backup or diversion. However, killing people doesn't tend to affect the meter to a huge degree, so you can run over or blow up as many people as you wish without major consequences. In terms of the international humanitarian law, the game is reasonably compliant, although whether the Geneva Convention can be applied to an interstellar conflict is a little vague. Here the game scores well. The EDF are unmistakable in their evil faceless armour and cool military vehicles. They tend to stay in their bases except for the odd patrol. Civilians are much more common and can be found all over the game world on foot and driving around in their futuristic Martian cars that bear a striking resemblance to that of other popular science fiction franchises. The game's other enemies, marauders, are also very distinctive. They are usually only encountered in the Badlands sector of the game world and usually at night. The player's encounters with them are usually of a violent nature as they will attack in groups with some nasty looking weapons while wearing S&M outfits. This, like most games, doesn't give the player the option to take prisoners unless it is a mission objective. The conflict on Mars is a bitter one, with no quarter given or expected. Throughout the game, the atrocities committed by the EDF and their mistreatment of prisoners is frequently mentioned. During combat, EDF soldiers will attack you relentlessly, and only flee if they are greatly outnumbered. In the mission, Catch and Release, you have to capture an EDF colonel called Broga, who used to run an internment camp. As you drive him off, he is confronted by former prisoners of his who gleefully get to work torturing information out of him as you make your escape. While a fairly nasty end for this fellow, the game does go to lengths to justify his treatment, with frequent references to his own sickening deeds. The game scores very poorly here. This is probably due to the developers wanting to show off their Geomod engine. Some of the weapons are ridiculously powerful with enormous splash damage and capable of reducing a large building to a smoking pile of rubble in a single shot. It is next to impossible to avoid collateral damage. Throughout the game, you have to target many military bases and EDF convoys. However, there are far more missions where you are called in to attack an EDF occupied facility. There is usually not much of these facilities remaining after you have killed the last EDF troopers. Many of the targets that you are called to destroy would generally be of high value and importance to a local economy and populace. Some examples include destroying a wind farm, power plants, processing plants, bridges, office buildings, and a large mine. There are also missions where the player must destroy large monuments and a town hall. These structures would likely be important cultural centres for the colonists. By the end of the game, most of the civilian infrastructure is in ruins. Of all the NPCs encountered in the game, they are all fit, healthy and aged between 21 and 50. There is medical personnel and ambulances, but these are only encountered in a few areas, and killing or destroying them has the same consequence as killing a regular civilian. It seems that on Mars nobody has sex or ages. This means that there are no children or elderly people. Giving the game a high score in this aspect is not very accurate, as these age groups are simply not included in the game. The only religious buildings are possessed by the Marauders, and they can only be accessed towards the very end of the game. They can be destroyed if the player wishes, but this has no consequence on gameplay. Overall, Red Faction gives the player a lot of destructive power. However, how this is used is totally down to player preference. While it is easier to kill a lot of enemies by leveling the building they are in, it is possible to clear it out with small arms and automatic weapons, leaving the structure intact and minimizing civilian deaths. It shouldn't be overlooked that this is one of the few war games that includes civilians and actually lets you kill them if you so choose. While other games like Call of Duty or Crysis might be more violent, they leave out civilians altogether, even causing the player to lose a life or restart a level if they accidentally kill one of the few you do encounter. Red Faction leaves the amount of civilian destruction and death up to the player, so this can be the most humanitarian or evil games, depending entirely on who is playing. This game I rate 8 out of 10. Sins of a Solar Empire is a science fiction real-time strategy game developed by Ironclad Games. The game is set in the far future and revolves around conflict between different galactic empires. There are 3 empires to choose from: Trader Emergency Coalition, your standard spacefaring human empire; the Vasari, an ancient alien species being pursued by an unknown and terrible enemy; and the Advent, an advanced pseudo-religious sect of humans. The game gives the player detailed control over their interstellar empire, where you must aggressively colonize neighboring planets, using large fleets of spacecraft and economic dominance. The game gives the player detailed economic control over their empires, and one must expand outward in order to find new resources and worlds to settle. Planets and asteroid settlements also have civilian populations that need to be provided for or protected, as they generate most of your resources and income. Your empire can be upgraded along a civilian and military tech tree. There is a bewildering amount of research for each species. Both are important. Civilian upgrades increase resource production and population. Military upgrades provide new offensive and defensive upgrades. The game's scaling is impressive, allowing for a seamless transition from a close-up view of your ships to a strategic view of your vast interstellar territory. The game is split into small playable areas within your planet's gravity wells. These are separated by vast distances that can be only crossed when your ships enter FTL. As the player explores their region of space, they will inevitably come in contact with other players, leading to an exciting strategic game as each player fights for dominance. Space combat is fun and looks fantastic. Again, it is at a large scale, with hugely powerful capital ships and swarms of smaller vessels slugging it out in the void. Planets generate resources and taxes, which can be used for construction or purchase of new fleets and infrastructure. Of all the games I've ever played, Sins of a Solar Empire probably has the highest body count of any. When you have to build up a large enough fleet, you can then attempt to capture a new world. When you finally subdue any warships or defense platforms in the vicinity, you must next bombard the world from orbit. Once its population and infrastructure is gone, you can move in and colonize. The annihilation of a planetary population is necessary before you can take it over, so the scale of the slaughter and devastation surpasses most of the war games by an order of magnitude. Again, it is dubious using the Geneva Convention for an interstellar conflict between two alien species. However, when we do use it, Sins of a Solar Empire fails dismally in every category. There is a distinction, but they are both fair targets. Civilian structures increase your income and improve your economic efficiency. This makes them high priority targets when attacking an enemy. Trader stations, orbital refineries, broadcasting stations are all unarmed and defenceless. Your planet's civilian population is a viable target and must be brought to zero before colonization can begin. This is done by getting your fleet to rain nuclear weapons on the world until you have eradicated its population. These genocidal assaults would likely kill hundreds of millions if not billions of people, as well as reduce their cities and culture to smoking glass. Here the game fares badly. Individual ship combat is fast and furious. When a ship's shields and armors have been reduced to zero, the ship will explode. The crews of these vessels do not stand much of a chance at survival. Even if they did manage to escape their ships before destruction by reaching an escape pod, they would likely either be shredded by a storm of high-speed radioactive debris or killed by the flood of heat and radiation as their ships detonate. There are no rescue ships or medical facilities, so once a ship is destroyed, its crew is written off with it. The large size and scale of the ships mean that they probably have large crews, so the death toll is likely to be huge for each engagement. Again, the game fares terribly. Civilian infrastructure provides your enemies with economic bonuses, speeds up their income, and improves their fleet's fighting ability. Trading outposts provide a monetary boost, so it is very much in your interest to reduce it to an expanding cloud of hot metal and gas. Certain research options can enhance the misery caused by some of your more apocalyptic weaponry. One such upgrade, called Heavy Fallout, causes your nukes to become so-called dirty bombs, poisoning the surface of the planet and reducing its speed at which your enemy's population can recover. Orbital bombardment is not a very precise method of attacking. Any viable planetary population will have children, the elderly, disabled people, religiously inclined, peace activists, and every other social class and niche present in modern society. The very act of wiping out a planet would mean that several generations and an entire culture is exterminated. Planets can change hands several times in a single match, so the death toll from a single extended game is likely to dwarf that of the combined war dead of every single conflict since recorded history began. While individual human and alien deaths are not seen by the player directly, intentional targeting of civilians and unarmed members of an enemy faction is a necessary part of the game. You cannot win a match unless you destroy them, so unlike Red Faction where you have a choice, in Sins of a Solar Empire you are forced to wipe out every living member of an alien species to win. This game I rate 1 out of 10. To conclude, most wargames today, despite the media hype and sensationalism, are usually pretty good when it comes to the treatment of civilians. A lot of games simply do not include them, while others severely punish the player if they kill or shoot them, intentionally or not. Red Faction gives the player the option to be a sadistic killer or a benevolent saviour. However, if they choose to kill every civilian they encounter, they will have a lot of difficulty progressing in the game. In Sins of a Solar Empire, the player must actively target and destroy civilian elements of their enemy's forces. While this game is far more ruthless than Red Faction, the large strategic nature of the game means that one never really thinks of the potential loss of life their actions cause. These two games treat the subject very differently. Wargames by their very nature are going to involve a lot of death and destruction. Most wargames avoid controversy by simply removing civilians, giving the player the impression they are fighting in a ghost town. Red Faction has left the decision to the player, meaning that the game is only as evil as the person who plays it. On the other hand, having the harsh realities of a state of total war between two bitter enemies as an integral part of the game is a mature and refreshing decision. Whether we like it or not, civilians die every day in the numerous war zones around the world. Rather than simply avoiding and pretending it doesn't happen, Sins of a Solar Empire shows the player how the simple and ruthless nature of war. Overall, if you do not like war and killing civilians, do not buy these games.